host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome Nathan King, co-founder and CEO, It's Electric, and Tiya Gordon, co-founder and COO, It's Electric. Tiya, Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, Grayson.
It's great to have you here. I think what you're doing is cool. So let's just start with the fact that what you're doing is cool. And I was like, oh, curbside charging is neat. I remember seeing that years ago in Santa Monica when I first partnered up. To kick this podcast off, how would you explain curbside charging and how does it work in an everyday scenario?
Sure, I can jump in there. So for drivers who drive electric vehicles in the United States, 85% of those drivers charge their vehicle at home, meaning they have a garage or a driveway that they can pull their car into reliably every single night, and they can plug in and charge and then wake up and have that full battery. And that is just a huge convenience. And what's part of what makes EV ownership so sticky and addictive in the US is because you never have to go to that gas station again. Same way that you plug in your phone overnight and you wake up and your battery is full, you do that with your car. But if you don't have a garage or a driveway, if you live in a more urban area or you're a garage orphan, meaning maybe your landlord uses the garage and you have to park on the street, you don't have a very easy way to charge your car and you're forced to use the limited numbers of public chargers that are out there. And to date, those public chargers have all been in the United States what's known as a destination charger, meaning I have to go to a shopping mall, I have to go to a supermarket, or it's along a highway corridor. And that reduces the convenience and it makes owning an EV a lot harder, and that's been slowing adoption. So curbside charging is the idea that we're just putting that outlet that everyone else has in their garage, we're just putting it on the curb right for you. So you come home, you're already parking on the street, and you just plug right in.
Nathan, from let's say, an everyday practical use standpoint, let's say, hey, Nathan, let's have lunch, or hey, Tiya, let's go get coffee. Do you see that as a convenience? Oh, we're going to go in and have lunch. Let's just plug it right there in the curb. It's not like, oh, no, I got to go find a charging center. I got to drive around in circles. And when I get there, there's probably a line. Do you see it maybe as a convenience that could help accelerate the adoption of EVs?
Yeah, and I can kind of add on to what Tiya was saying. I've been an EV driver now for 3 years, and I've got a pretty decent battery, about 75 kilowatt hours. I am not constantly worried about charging because once I'm up around, 80%, I know that I've got a couple hundred miles before I need to worry about charging. And so what I'll typically do is just sort of like in my head, make a mental note, like once I start to get around 30, 20%, I'm going to find a level 2 charger and I'm going to leave it there for a bit. The only time I'm really ever thinking about like, oh, I better be plugged in while I'm, parking and doing an errand is if I'm like driving between cities. Typically, I have my level 2 charger options that I have in my neighborhood, and I'm lucky enough to have some chargers here in the workplace. And, once a week or so, I plug in and charge. That kind of experience really is how most drivers, I think, are managing their EVs when they don't have a garage or a driveway. So I'm one of these drivers. We live in Brooklyn. We don't have the luxury of a driveway. And so I'm just kind of in my head, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to have to do that overnight charge session. And that's really kind of what we're unlocking. We're trying to give more opportunities for more drivers to do that. I think when you go to a gas car driver today and they don't have a driveway, trying to get them to understand that overnight, once a week kind of charging behavior it's a lot of driver education. But once you're into that world, it starts to make a lot of sense.
Was your experience living in Brooklyn one of the inspirations why you and Tiya came together to co-found It's Electric?
Oh, absolutely. It's Electric is a pandemic company. I did not have a car for about 20 years living in New York City. And before starting It's Electric, I worked in architecture. I was very interested in sustainable building. And so when I looked into getting a car during the pandemic, realized that the only place that I could have charged was about a mile away from where I lived. It was not very convenient to get to. And so I realized, and then talking to people, a lot of my friends and neighbors who live in Brooklyn had the same kind of circumstance. They wanted to switch from gas to electric, didn't know where they would charge. And it got me thinking about different ways that we could try to solve this problem.
It's a problem. So, Tiya, what kind of adoption are you seeing from the local neighborhoods or communities where you're putting in the curbside charging? Are you seeing any data where perhaps there is a larger incline or interest in those individuals switching to electric vehicles because of the convenience factor? Oh, I don't have a driveway. I don't have a place to park. Well, I can park on the street and charge. Okay, this is great. Problem solved.
Honestly, like the best emails that we receive are those conversion stories. And we didn't anticipate getting them so quickly, but we've gotten at least half a dozen so far of people writing to us to say that they've been wanting an electric car for X period of time and they have not been able to get it because they literally don't know where they're going to charge it. And they went out and bought an electric car or leased an electric car or bought a used EV, which is, I'm not sure if you saw the headline from today, but that used electric vehicles are the largest performing vehicle in the car market right now. And that since we put that charger on their block or in their neighborhood, that was their pivot point that they were able to get that electric vehicle.
And the interesting thing I want to highlight about your chargers, they look good. I mean, you just made these things look good. That's what I noticed. And for the audience, if you go on the It's Electric website, they did a really good job on the videos and the photos, but it looks good. And the design is described as compact with a detachable table, which I want to ask you about. And it's designed for urban life. So let's dive into this. One, it looks pretty. How did you make it look nice? And what went into putting all the components inside and still making it look nice and not looking like it's called a modern day telephone?
You know, somewhere on our website is literally the same words that came out of my mouth when Nathan and I were contemplating this issue. I don't want to paint the picture that it was the pandemic and we went to bed one night and we woke up the next morning and we're like, let's start an electric vehicle charging company. Like, it was not at all that sequential, but it was during the pandemic. You know, public transportation was unreliable, unsafe, pre-masks, pre-vaccines. It was very dangerous to be able to move around the city. And at the time, my daughter was 5, and there was a lot of other factors that went into the decision to consider a car. And when I started again looking into electric vehicle charging infrastructure, again, this was not something I ever took a Sunday spin into just let me just understand what this is like, because you don't look into it until you need it. And then when we looked into it, literally the first words out of my mouth, I'm like, why are these all so big and bad and ugly? It's seriously, it's like no thought went into the fact that these are going onto residential tree-lined blocks where people want to, sort of keep a certain aesthetic and a certain quality. And that's why there's so much NIMBYism when you kind of want to put on these standard EV chargers into residential neighborhoods. A standard EV charger all have a detachable cable. They're anywhere between, 5 and I will tell you 13 feet tall because they have to do cable management. And they often are, several feet wide. And people really push back when they hear this is going to go on their block or in front of their building. They don't want their dogs that they walk. They don't want their kids that play in front of the building to be around sort of such something that looks so off and so scary. So, what we did isn't mind-blowing. There's tons of curbside charging in London, in Paris, across the EU, in the Nordics, in Finland. We just didn't have it here in the US. And we kind of, I'll pause there so we can kind of go into the reason why. But we knew that curbside charging worked because it was already, 10 years this has been up and running in other countries. It was a question of why wasn't it here in the United States?
Why wasn't it here?
Okay, so a few reasons. One, Americans like gas pumps, right? I really truly believe that the individuals that designed those first EV chargers were I'm going to gesture here, I know we're on audio, were well, when Americans put gas in their car, they go like this and they pull this big heavy thing off and then they stick it in their car. So we're just going to basically make that same aesthetic and that same experience for EV charging, even though what you really need to do is just basically create a plug in a socket. You don't need to recreate this experience. And so one, I just think it was this, sort of desire to kind of recreate a gas pump experience to help Americans create a better conversion experience. But I don't think that was the wrong choice. And the second reason is that in London in particular, the accessory feed, so the power that goes to the streetlights and the lampposts and the power that's sort of running right underneath the sidewalk is all 220 or 240 volts. So London can really easily retrofit lampposts into EV chargers. So it's very clever. When you go there, they just have these little ports, like these little portholes that open up that you can stick your cable into, your detachable cable into, and then attach to your car. Here in the United States, with the exception of Los Angeles, we don't have that same level of power in our lampposts. So we cannot make those conversions as fast as they can overseas. Again, LA can do it. It's like that one city that has that right level of power, but every other city does not have that convenience. So it was a question of how do we put curbside charging everywhere when our quote unquote electrical infrastructure doesn't have the right power capacity to do so. But what we discovered at Selectric is that actually cities do have this infrastructure ready to go, but that infrastructure is the buildings.
The buildings, that's interesting. So then, Nathan, do you tap into the building's energy source and kind of deal with the property owner or the management company to get the access to that power?
Yeah, Grace, and that's exactly what we're doing. And there's a lot of different benefits for doing it that way. Establishing a brand new electrical service on a city sidewalk is sometimes just not possible. There's not enough physical space to locate some of the equipment that you need to have there. So, and a lot of times there's not available capacity from in that sort of service territory. So you've got to look for different ways to find that power. And what we found is about 80% or so of the buildings that we look at can host 2 of our chargers. They have what we call a little bit of slack in the line, right? They are using a lot of what is coming in from that feed from the utility, but there's still some left over. And so we kind of tap into that leftover available power supply at that building, and we pull that out to the curb instead of trying to create a brand new service connection with the utility. So that saves us money because it's less expensive to do it that way, and we don't have to buy, transformers and meter rigs and things like that. And it saves us time because we're not going through this like really intense engineering review with the electrical utility, and it gives us a huge amount of flexibility. Now we can go wherever there's power in cities, and like I said, that's the vast majority of the buildings that we look at.
I got to put my geek out engineering hat on. Do you micro trench, or how do you get the electrical cables? Because you have the width of a sidewalk. So do you do a micro trenching to bring up, or how do you do that?
I like to do an analogy here, if you don't mind me jumping in. When you are doing those mainline utility connections, as every other company that does public charging has to, when they're making that utility connection, you're basically trenching about 7 feet down into the street to make those connections. So we think about that as like open heart surgery. And what we're doing is we're putting a saw cut in the sidewalk that's about 6-8 inches down. And we think about it as orthoscopic surgery. So basically running this single conduit below the sidewalk, really unintrusive. And then once our charger's installed, we've actually designed it so that the top unit is like a Lego. It pops off, it's modular, so we can continuously upgrade that hardware to version 2, version 3, version 4 without having to disrupt the sidewalk ever again. So we really kind of think about construction in those terms.
I want people to think about curbside charging as being fundamentally the same as putting a charger in your driveway or garage. I know that we're talking about sidewalk work, but it's essentially the same kind of construction process as if you are pulling out a 32 amp circuit out to your level 2 charger in your garage. It isn't really that much different. And so our installs take around 2 days. It does involve kind of, cutting open that sidewalk, as Tiya mentioned, but the depth that we go is relatively shallow, and it's not that big of a deal.
Interesting. So now I'm going to put my policy hat on for you, Nathan. How does that work from a permitting process? Is that a long, drawn-out city or county, depending on the jurisdiction? How does that work?
So, one thing I like to say is that we can't solve all problems, but we are the best solution, right? So yes, we do have to work with our city partners, and we have to work with them very carefully. And depending on the nature of our relationship, there's different things that we'll have to do. So all of our deployments, whether it's Alameda or whether it's Boston, we have a very close point of contact within the city, and we work with them as we sort of go through finding sites and then actually going out and getting those permits. And so the difference, I think, between, the analogy that I just made, it's probably easier to get a permit if it's just your private driveway, but there are some extra steps that we have to take once we're in the sidewalk. But again, these things are easily done. It's what I like to say is that it's not that it's hard what we're doing, it's just complicated. There's just more steps, right? It's still like, again, I mentioned before, my background is in architecture. It's not surprising to me that you need to get permits for things, right? Everything that you see that's in the built environment has a city permit for it. And even when you're talking about putting EV chargers in a structured garage, there's also permits that you have to go through. So this is something that's baked into what we do. And, we kind of think that the effort that we put into obtaining those permits is worth it for us.
Staying on the policies, how about zoning? Are there zoning issues when you're working with a city where you have to be in a commercial area versus a pedestrian area? Do you run into any zoning issues at all?
The beauty of our building powered chargers is that it allows us to literally deploy anywhere where there's a building and a curb. So we're not limited to where a utility will tell us to make that utility connection agreement, which can be just here or here. And because of that, we can open up what we call community requested. So answering your question, no, there aren't zoning requirements, but we have people who in neighborhoods want to see our chargers, request it, and then we can go and then find properties that are within a reasonable walk shed, usually a quarter of a mile where they live. A fun fact that we recently learned, though, that does relate to zoning is that, and I'll send you the citation after the call, is that often to put in DC fast charging, that is not allowable in a lot of the residentially zoned areas. So those have to go in more industrial zoned areas, which again creates a lack of convenience if people are looking for that quick residential charge solution.
So let's start. I'm starting to keep going on zoning because there's just so many interesting things, and you know this from your experience as a building that's electric. There's multiple layers to policy and regulations. And I'm going to just zone in on New York City now. Over the last several years, there's been a very big effort in New York City to put in bike lanes. And you're starting to see where you have the curb, and now you have the bike lane, and then sometimes you have outdoor dining, depending on the permitting issues, and then you have the road. So if your chargers are on, say, a curb, and then the length of the curb gets designated as a bike lane, do you have to move those, or what happens to your installation if that's how the city decides to do that?
So I can get into some specifics about how we kind of work with cities, but first I want to have everybody sort of reimagine away from busy commercial roads and boulevards when you think about curbside charging. I want you to think of those narrow width side streets off of those commercial boulevards. We have a term that we use here at It's Electric where we look for things that are juicy corners. And a juicy corner is basically an intersection between a residential street and a commercial boulevard. And what we want to do is have our charger on that residential side street and not on the boulevard. So we want to avoid things like bus lanes. We want to avoid metered parking. We want to avoid future bike lanes. We want to be where we see people kind of parking their cars overnight. And so you don't see a lot of that in your commercial streets. That's what we're looking. We're trying to create that convenience of that overnight charging session that's close by to where you live. So when we go to a city and we propose a new location, we're thinking about that already. We're making sure before we even bring it up to the city that we're not going to propose something that is in an existing bike lane or a future bus lane. A lot of times cities have these sort of bus lane sort of future mapping already available for us. If they don't, the city will definitely tell us, actually, you can't put a charger there because we're actually thinking about making that into a bike lane someday. And so there is definitely a process that very specifically works with that specific location. But generally speaking, we're not in conflict with those other kinds of uses on the street.
That's wonderful. I like your juicy corners analogy. I think that's really clever. Tiya, when you're looking to deploy on a juicy corner residential area, do you meet with the local community to gauge their interest to see, okay, how many individuals own EVs today and individuals thinking about getting EVs? Do you go and engage with the local community when you're looking for, I love the term, sorry, Nathan, the juicy corner opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we really want to be referred to as what we call everyone's neighborhood charger. We want people to feel like this is their charger. We're all a little daffy sometimes here at It's Electric. So we often say these are the chargers in your neighborhood, a little Mr. Rogers throwback, just because we really want this to be your friendly, easy, convenient charging solution. And so with that, we don't want to meet opposition. So we always follow our city's lead. We are in touch with community boards. We are in touch with local electeds. And then, a fun little story is that, in one of our deployments in one of our cities, as there always will be, I don't want to make it sound like we're angels and everyone just loves us all the time, because EV charging is, for better or for worse, it does divide people. And what we found is that usually just a little bit of positive PR can really help. So, for example, in one of our cities, there was a older person who did not drive an EV, and I don't think they would necessarily drive an EV in the rest of their lifetime. But they assumed that their tax dollars had gone towards putting this infrastructure in their neighborhood. And they didn't like that. So we went and we talked to them and it was all smoothed out. But then it kind of gave us the idea that, maybe a lot of people have this feeling and they won't want to see this infrastructure because they'll feel like they somehow paid for it when they didn't necessarily want it. So we made a little sticker that's about, 6 inches by 8 inches that we stick on our chargers. It's a big orange cat that's wearing like a $ collar, and it says, "0 tax dollars were paid in the creation of this EV charger." This EV charger cost taxpayers $0 is the exact language. And it just kind of like, oh, all right. Like, so then if anyone's kind of like coming up to this thing and thinking that, again, this was city tax dollars paid instead of it going towards education or sanitation or anything like that, it's very clear that it was privately funded.
Does that build trust? It's clever. Do you feel that builds trust in these local communities? And when you have, I'll use the term skeptics that would question us, does that help build trust since you're very transparent with that?
I mean, we want to be as transparent as possible. We've had people reach out to us to ask us a bazillion questions on the chargers, and we again try and keep everything. We also, another thing, we always hire local labor. We're hiring local electricians. We're hiring local contractors. We're bringing jobs. We're bringing, a lot of economic opportunity into the neighborhoods, not only from the construction required to put the chargers in, but also from the revenue share. We're really, if you recall, I'm not sure if we, earlier in the call, since we're building powered and we're pulling power from that building, we revenue share 20% of what we earn on every charger with that building. So maybe we didn't hit that. So it's a good thing we talked about that.
I'm assuming that's building you allies and friends.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have this great picture on our LinkedIn. Again, totally random, but it was after Nathan was up commissioning for one of our chargers in Boston, and 2 drivers literally were so excited that they ran out onto the street and they high-fived that lived on the block. And our project director, Judy Chang, caught a picture of it. But it was literal palpable excitement of not having to go and wait in lines to charge in a Trader Joe's on the weekend or at a Walmart on the weekend. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, I think that we generate more excitement than we do NIMBYism.
Grayson, I want to maybe kind of step back really quickly too and just talk about what we're doing as a company that's a little unique from a business model perspective. We're not an OEM, right? Like we don't sell our hardware. Every charger that is put in the ground in the United States is something that we own and operate. And for a level 2 charger network, it's kind of unique. Most of the big OEMs out there are selling chargers to property owners, and they're making money on the margin from the cost. And sometimes there's like service agreements and things like that. But what we're trying to do is kind of like what the DC fast charging networks are trying to do. We're making a capital investment and we're earning back the CapEx by earning revenue from drivers. And so what it does is it kind of changes our set of priorities as a company, right? Like we know that this community relations thing is important for us because if we don't get good utilization, then we're not making money. We know that hardware design then becomes very important for us. So we need to have something that's sturdy and reliable and has like maximum uptime because again, down chargers for us mean lost revenue. And so in fact, our chargers are very reliable, and the detachable cable is one of the reasons that we sort of went with that model, is to ensure our own uptime. And then this relationship building, this revenue share is like what we're doing is sort of leasing that spare capacity, that slack power that we find in existing buildings, but it's also another way that we try to build this community.
Why was the decision made early on, Nathan, to own the asset? Why did you want to own the physical charging asset?
There's more revenue to be made from the charger by keeping it there for a long time than by selling it once. And so that's kind of what we wanted to do. We also knew that when we went to a new city, the city is going to be very interested in things like uptime. In California, there's a lot of chargers that are, stranded assets because they were deployed in the very, very early days of EV, EV transition. And maybe chargers ended up where they weren't going to be very well utilized. A lot of chargers, just kind of became abandoned even if they were being utilized. And so the pitch to cities when we're talking to them to get this permission, they're like, oh, well, you guys are actually going to be responsible for this charger after it goes into the ground. Because cities don't want to become charge point operators, right? Like the cities don't have the resources or the level of staffing that's needed. Utilities, same thing, right? Like we have a lot of examples of utilities installing chargers, but at a certain point they realize like, wait, this, we don't have time and capacity to, manage a fleet of chargers. So that's really kind of why we kind of made that decision. We thought we would get farther faster. And I think a lot of the early traction and deployments that we've already landed are based on this fact that we're kind of a vertically integrated charging provider.
It's smart. What would you say your average lifetime is of each hardware iteration? Obviously, you're constantly updating the hardware because Tiya so elegantly explained this. I love the Lego analogy. What would you say that the average is for the base? Not the top Lego, but it's called the green block, the base block. What would you say that is when you put that into service in the field? Because I ask because you can have deployments in California, we have nicer weather, and in Boston, you have snow, and then you have the dreaded salt that comes on the roads, and that salt seems to eat away at everything. Any insight you could share in terms of like what you see as from an average lifespan of those when you put them up where you have to replace them?
I can answer that. Like we've designed these things to last at least 5 years, and I think we'll expect to see a lot of these chargers lasting up to 10. I'll tell you that we do have chargers now out in the field that have been there. They'll be going through their third winter and with no issues, right? And so we can point to a track record now of our hardware performing quite well. So yeah, I mean that's the idea, is that these chargers really kind of stay out there and work for us for up to a decade.
And Tiya, one of the markets that was touched on earlier is Boston. You've been there since March. What has that experience been like? Obviously, you have the high five from the community, which is awesome. But how would you describe being in the Commonwealth, and will you expand to other parts of Massachusetts now that you have a foothold in Boston?
Yeah, I have a few different answers to that. One is that, when we first deployed there, it was under the strong influence of local city leadership. So we have an exceptional mayor, Mayor Michelle Wu, who part of her platform in terms of sustainability and climate for Boston, Boston has one of the highest amounts of sea level rise projected across the country. The implications of not taking action on greenhouse gases are real, and they're costly to many cities. And those are often the cities that are the ones that are most vigilant about putting forward actual climate action plans. So they have a plan on decarbing transportation. They have a plan on decarbing buildings. And their plan on decarbing transportation, in Mayor Wu's words, is that they want a public EV charger within a 5-minute walk of every Bostonian. And so I'd like to joke and I say, well, like all great revolutions start with one thing, and that's an RFP. So they put out an RFP looking for a solution that would allow them to achieve this. And It's Electric won that competitive RFP to be able to do so. And, from that, we've had just, unending support from the city. It was a very exciting day for them to be able to say that they were, and I want to just give them their flowers here, they were the first city in the United States to put a building-powered curbside charger on city streets. We're now in 4 different cities curbside, but Boston was absolutely the first. They jumped in the pool before anybody else. So they definitely get credit for that. And that's also because they have a really, really, really intelligent and aggressive climate team that's working on solutions. And they have a very cool name for it. It's called the Office of New Urban Mechanics. And they're basically trying to find solutions throughout the city to help meet goals. And that's working through public-private partnerships and everything else. I hope that answered the question.
No, it says, how fast do you think you can scale in Boston with the city's clear desires to put more and more chargers in the city?
Well, we can scale as fast as we want to. If we, wanted to today, we could meet a maximum commitment of around 225 chargers. But we want to be able to install intelligently and thoughtfully. And to your point earlier, to make sure we're really going into communities that are excited about us or who are curious about the infrastructure. So we take a very human-centered approach, not only in the design of our chargers, but in the approach in terms of how we deploy. I personally get probably less now because it's finally cooling. But last year, I would get maybe 7 or 8 emails a week from a company that would tell me that their AI can tell me how I can site chargers better than I can do it on my own. And that was getting really annoying really fast. And, we took the bait and we did some free demos to kind of try and understand what these companies were selling. And it was, not, it wasn't right. It wasn't really kind of getting into the heart of it. Is that the answer is, where do you put chargers? The answer is everywhere, right? Like, it's not about putting them just here or there. The answer is having chargers be ubiquitous. But then the second half of that is to make sure that when they go in, people are excited by them, that they're going to be used. Flash forward to, San Francisco, which was our second city. San Francisco was our second city to adopt curbside building powered chargers. We now see over 44% utilization on those chargers. If you compare that to New York City, which is the only city that has reporting on curbside, and New York City used this lovely company that we work with and we greatly respect called Flow. They're out of Canada. They did their first pilot with Flow chargers here in New York. It took Flow chargers about 2 years to see 30% utilization. But I think because we had such pent-up demand and such support from the neighborhood in which we were deploying, our charger utilization effectively doubled every month to get us to 44% in the first 4 months.
Grace, I also want to do some step back out again, and then step back in. And just a little also like how we're imagining the future. You should not imagine that in the future that every single parking space has an EV charger. Really, one of our chargers is needed, or we'll put in 2 chargers, let's say, every quarter mile or so. So we're not going to blanket cities with EV chargers. We're finding these juicy corners. We're putting a couple of chargers there. That 5-minute walk that Boston is targeting is a good sort of metric for what we're thinking, because many different drivers that park on city streets can sort of share those chargers. And, depending on the neighborhood, people use their car more or less for commuting. We might need to have different ratios of number of chargers to vehicles. But in the US, about 90 million vehicles don't have access to an off-street parking space. So even if we have like a ratio of, let's put 1 charger in for every 20 EVs, we're talking about, 4 million curbside chargers that are needed just in the United States alone. So while we're really excited about the sort of the micro scale when you compare it to that larger demand that we're already seeing, really, we think this is a very, very exciting industry that has a huge amount of growth potential. And we're really excited to be kind of one of the first companies sort of leading the way.
You're right about the growth potential. And you hit it earlier on in this podcast. We said, you're not going there every day, maybe once a week. And if individuals commute, maybe it's every other day. So you're right. Once you spread them out, and it's good for the grid. And then 2, from a design standpoint, it's really good. I want to see the design standpoint here to you. We touched on it a little bit, but I got to ask, the detachable cable, that to me is, you want to call it, that's one of the hallmarks of your design. It's common in the Nordics, it's common in the EU and the UK, but not necessarily here in America. How are you building the adoption of the detachable cable model here in the United States?
I like to liken it akin to when you go to the airport and you put your phone in your pocket and you throw your charger in your backpack, and you know that when you're at that airport, you can plug in and charge in any socket that you find. Imagine a world in which you did not have your own charger with you in the airport, and you had to search and find like that one janky kiosk at like a bookstore that had like the attached cables, and they're all kind of frayed, and like maybe the tip is broken on one. Or maybe you get there and only the Android cable is there and the iPhone cable got ripped off by somebody else. That's what the world is like right now for charging. So we are literally just putting that iPhone charger in your backpack so you can plug in and charge in a socket that's convenient to you. Adoption is not hard once you try it. Everyone, new technology is new. But once people try it, we haven't had any churn. No one sent back a cable.
Because think about this: you buy an iPhone, you don't get the it's electric plug. You just get the cable. So you think that's eventually where this is going to go?
100%. Our chargers, the port that is plugged into on the actual charger body, that is a standard that's European. So when other curbside companies start up in the US, which we know this will happen, this is inevitable, we're not going to be able to, meet the market of what we project will be, basically, the millions of curbside chargers that are needed. Everyone will be universal and that cable will work for everyone. And we know that, for example, like Rivian is moving the charge port on their vehicles to be able to accommodate curbside, both for the European sales, but also anticipating that here in the US.
Sorry, shout out to SAE for including the J3068 socket standard in the J3400 and J1772 appendices. So just the cables that as Tiya said before, the cables that we are using are the same cables that are being used in the EU and the UK. It's that 3068, what is called the sort of the universal socket. And also, while we were kind of the first to get out there with detachable, there are other companies now that we are friendly with in the US that are also doing detachable cables. So we've got future market penetration coming in from where it's already established in the UK. And now we have some cohorts of other detachable cable startups getting chargers out there as well.
That's fantastic. Nathan, Tiya, putting this all together as we look to wrap up this and have a conversation, what is the future of It's Electric? Nathan, we'll start with you, sir, please.
Well, what we are very excited about here, of course, is expanding the opportunity for people to switch from gas cars to electric by making charging in cities far more convenient than it is today. What we're also really, really excited about is kind of starting to rethink how we look at EV batteries. I'm going to let Tiya talk more about it because she has some great thoughts about how we kind of think about managing our network with these kind of huge power sources. I will say that we just recently announced a California Energy Commission grant to develop a bidirectional curbside charger, which doesn't currently exist. And so this idea that It's Electric is not just an EV charging company, this is something in about 5 years, we're actually going to become an urban energy management company as well.
What does that mean? Let me explain what that means. So as Nathan alluded, we started as cars powered by buildings. And now we're working with the California Energy Commission to be buildings powered by cars. So we have a large grant from them that we're working in conjunction with the University of Berkeley, University of Delaware, with support from Ford, with support from Kia, with support from PG&E, to create the world's first bidirectional curbside network, which means that every street-parked EV can become a grid asset. Think about batteries in electric vehicles as basically the storage of energy, right? It's a wallet. You're storing energy in it, and energy is going to become the new currency, right? We're going to be able to use the energy as we need to push into the car. And then let's say there's a brownout from the number of reasons brownouts happen these days, so many reasons. The driver would be able to get a notification on their phone that says, hey, we see you got 80% battery on your car. If you push 30% back in right now, we'll pay you X dollars per kilowatt hour, right? And so, the same way that we have battery walls in buildings, we will have basically this armada of batteries that are driving around cities that are able to be dispatched into different neighborhoods, especially when you think about the opportunity when cities start electrifying their fleets and to be able to use those for urban resilience on a city level. It's a really amazing concept to think about the fluidity between energy of buildings and transportation in cities. It's like we're not pushing oil back and forth through tubes. That doesn't work, but we are pushing energy back and forth through tubes, and that does work.
Buildings powered by cars that support the grid is the future. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is It's Electric. Nathan, Tiya, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Yeah. Thanks, Grayson.
Thank you so much. And you're hired as a copywriter. That's awesome. Bye.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next.
Be sure to join us next week as we dive into SAE J3341,
which addresses carbon footprint methodologies for passenger vehicles.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.